Yeah, we realize you're all on deadline. I have with me Vic Fideli, our finance critic. I think what we've just seen is an unprecedented level of arrogance from the Liberal government. I, in my 24 years, have never seen two ministers challenge the auditor in the way those ministers, Minister Shirelli and Minister Dogood, and they're misleading the public. I mean, there never was a business case, and we said it at the time, for the 1.9, or at that time $1 billion, but $1.9 billion smart meter program. These things were offered up when we were in government, and we rejected them. And it particularly, we challenged them when they were coming in. The timing, when hydro rates were rising for other reasons, like the Green Energy Act, to bring in smart meters and to charge consumers the full price of those meters was unconscionable. And they went ahead and did it anyway and drove jobs out of the province. And now, as you pointed out, people can't afford their hydro rates. The other story there that's been downplayed is the $50 billion they've collected in a global adjustment. Global adjustments didn't exist under the PC government. This was totally made up. 70% of your time of use charge is made up of global adjustment. What is global adjustment? 60% of that $50 billion is used to subsidize the Green Energy Act. So when they talk about it's used to pay other producers of electricity, when I asked the auditor in the lockup, she said it's a 60-40 split. 60% is the windmills and the solar powers at these prices that Ontario consumers can't afford, not to mention the fact that they're going into communities that don't want them. So that's the story there. Billions and billions of dollars piled up. And what do? Turn around and say the auditor isn't accurate. Yes, Mr. Shirelli should resign. I stepped aside when one of my staff spread a rumor about a doctor's income one year. You go to the penalty box, you pay the price, you've been ripping off consumers, and someone's head has to fall for it. And it should be that gentleman that just stood here today and misled the people of Ontario and misled you, ladies and gentlemen. I don't know if Vic has any more to say about smart meters, but I also want to comment about Mars, and I'll let Vic get in on the details if you'd like. But Mars, it's very clear, as you've all pointed out, that the auditor says it's $8 billion more than we had to pay. This is for phase 2. It was nice of Gord Nixon to come here today and talk about phase 1. We started phase 1. I actually started as Science and Technology Minister. Jim Flaherty picked it up and did the actual opening. It's been a success. They should never have started the construction of phase 2 in the first place without a proper business plan. And then when they did start, it should have been a transparent process for all to see. They have a bias, which normally we would be accused of as conservatives, wanting to always use an alternative finance plan, or a P3. They obviously have a huge bias towards using P3s rather than the traditional public sector farming this out to the private sector, but the public sector having oversight of the projects. There are a number of projects done very well by the public sector each year. What her report says is that they assess the risk of the public sector 5 times greater than they should have. So that obviously 74, now 76 projects have gone to the AFP process because their risk model is flawed in the beginning. And the minister tried to obfuscate all over the place on that, but the fact of the matter is we agree with the auditor. You know, and I'll just say finally, there are times when you're a minister that you find the auditor's advice tough medicine, but you swallow that tough medicine. You're responsible, and you certainly don't challenge the credibility of an officer of this legislature. Questions?
Well, what is the common denominator here? With all, be it the smart meters, be it the 3 Ps, whatever. Is it that nobody is minding the store? That their oversight just doesn't seem to be there?
Well, I think it's all about a value for money, and it's, the overlying issue is transparency. Look at Mars. I mean, the Auditor General talked about the lack of transparency. They knew this was out there since 2010 and created a perception that there's a bailout. A big part of it is that they changed the rules to allow the loan, and then went in and shifted it to the ministry. I mean, they did that by regulation. Nobody really was aware of it, so it's a lack of transparency. And the same with the smart meters. I mean, we remember when I was first here, 2011, the Auditor General, then Auditor General, said there was no business plan done for the Green Energy Act, and as a result, watch out, global adjustment will hit $8.1 billion in 2014. What does she announce today? 2014, we're already at $7.7 billion. So it's a lack of transparency and it's a lack of openness.
And now we see today just a complete lack of anybody taking any ounce of accountability for any of their actions. These are decisions that the government made. The bureaucrats didn't make them. Infrastructure Ontario didn't make the bias. They were forced upon them. And they blame everyone but themselves. These ministers, and these are only the two that have appeared before you today. Goodness knows what else other ministers might have as excuses up their sleeves. It's a constant pattern of this government. Blame anyone but themselves. Don't take any responsibility. No one's head ever rolls, whether it's Orange or gas plants or today's fiasco. This is a very damning Auditor General's report, and somebody has to be held accountable for it.
This government spent $50 billion more buying electricity than what they sold it for. I mean, that's the bottom line. That's why your hydro rates have tripled. And that's exactly what the Auditor General told us in 2011. Why? They did no business plan. They did no business plan for smart meters. They did no business plan for green energy. And there's no transparency.
What about the government's argument that we simply don't understand the numbers, that energy is a very complicated file, and that even the auditor can trip over the numbers?
Well, I mean, it's an extraordinary claim. The auditor is a very bright person, and again, it's a level of arrogance that's seeped into this government that they can say anything and it'll get reported and it'll eventually be the truth. On every issue of the 12 issues she investigated today, you know, if the definition of maturity wasn't you never say I told you so, we would be saying we told you so on every issue. And again, they don't listen. They don't take responsibility, and they're not transparent in any of their processes. And at the end of the day, the taxpayers are not getting value for money.
Debt and deficit's the same thing. What she said, it affirms everything we've been saying since 2011, that Ontario's debt continues to grow faster than the economy. And what does that do? We spoke about it at question period this morning. It now takes away, because you're paying $11 billion in interest, it takes away from the very money that you should be spending on education, health, transit, infrastructure. That's exactly what the auditor said today, which was exactly the questions that all of us have asked in question period almost every day.
Yeah, she uses the term crowding out other program spending that should be priorities. Anyway.
Sorry, Premier Dalton McGuinty taking this approach to the auditor's report. Is this something that's unique to this particular Premier?
Well, Dalton McGuinty ultimately didn't take responsibility for anything in terms of, I mean, he left midstream. Quite a shock to some of us, and I think it was because he could see the quagmire that he had created, particularly around the Green Energy Act and hydro prices.
You mentioned that you guys tend to have more of a bias towards the private sector. Based on what's in this report, should the government be bringing more projects in-house?
Well, they need to change their assessment tool. That's their risk assessment tool, and they need to get rid of the bias. I mean, it's an extraordinary bias. You know, if you're assessing one group, you're saying automatically with no empirical evidence, as was pointed out by the star there, you just make up these figures. Apparently, you're basically skewing all your contracts into one stream. When we have successful contracts, we have the Sick Kids Research at Elman Bay, the new research tower that was done the traditional way, public sector oversight, and tendered out. The actual building, of course, isn't done by bureaucrats; it's done by private sector. I think the auditor told me privately in the lockup when I asked her there was a project at Sheridan College. She has a whole pile in her head that we're fine. They came in on budget, on time, and you know, we didn't have $8 billion worth of extra cost just because this bias has been built into the system.
Thanks, guys.
Okay.